Why most avoidants come back after no contact. You know that moment you finally stop reaching out? You decide enough is enough. You go no contact. It hurts, but you stick to it. And just when you're finally beginning to breathe again, they come back. Why does this happen? Why do so many avoidants resurface after silence? Here's the truth. Most people think the avoidant is this emotionally disconnected person who never really cared. But that's a misread. They do care. It's just that closeness triggers fear in them. Emotional intimacy feels threatening, so they distance themselves. But the thing about distance, it also creates space for reflection. When you go no contact, you're no longer chasing, proving, or fixing. You're reclaiming your power. And to someone with avoidant tendencies, your silence speaks volumes. It removes pressure. It gives them the space they say they want, until they realize they don't like what that space feels like without you in it. But here's where you need to be strong. Just because someone comes back doesn't mean they're ready to stay. Coming back is not the same as showing up differently. It's not a promise of change. It's often just a reaction to loss. So if they do reappear, ask yourself this: are they reaching out to avoid discomfort, or are they reaching out with intention and growth? Because you deserve someone who doesn't just miss you when you're gone. You deserve someone who values you while you're there. When people hear the term avoidant, they often imagine someone who is cold, detached, or incapable of deep emotional connection. It's easy to assume that avoidant individuals simply don't care as much, or that they're emotionally unavailable in the most dismissive sense. But that's a surface level interpretation of something far more complex. The reality is that most avoidantly attached people aren't devoid of emotion. They actually feel deeply. What sets them apart isn't the absence of feeling, but the fear of what emotional closeness might cost them. Avoidants typically develop this pattern early in life, often due to inconsistent emotional support, or a sense that vulnerability led to disappointment, rejection, or even shame. So as adults, when they begin to feel connected to someone, it triggers an alarm system inside them. Intimacy feels dangerous, and closeness feels like a trap. They worry, often unconsciously, that if they allow someone too close, they'll lose their autonomy, be judged, or become reliant on someone who may later let them down. So they protect themselves in the only way they know how: by pulling away. That withdrawal is not about a lack of interest, it's about defense. Ironically, the more they start to care, the more likely they are to create distance, because caring makes them feel vulnerable. So when a relationship begins to deepen and move into emotional territory, their instinct is to retreat. Not because they don't value the connection, but because the connection feels like it might demand more than they're comfortable giving, or more than they believe they can handle. When an avoidant pulls away, it's not always because they've stopped loving or feeling. It's often because they're overwhelmed. Emotional closeness shines a light on old fears and coping mechanisms that tell them it's safer to be alone than to risk being emotionally exposed. And while their behavior can feel confusing and hurtful to the person on the other side, especially someone who's secure or anxious in their attachment, it often stems from an internal conflict, not from indifference. Understanding this doesn't excuse poor communication or inconsistency. It's not an invitation to chase or fix someone who isn't showing up. But it does help you make sense of why someone might withdraw, even when things were going well. It allows you to stop taking their distance as a reflection of your worth and start seeing it for what it often is: their attempt to protect themselves from feelings they haven't fully learned how to navigate. In this light, the avoidance behavior becomes less about coldness and more about fear. They're not emotionally barren, they're emotionally guarded. And while they may struggle to express vulnerability, it doesn't mean their heart is disengaged. It often means they haven't yet built the tools to handle emotional closeness without feeling like they're losing control. That's why understanding the psychology behind avoidance is so important, because it allows you to respond with clarity instead of confusion, and compassion without losing your own boundaries. When someone exhibits avoidant behavior in a relationship, it's easy to assume they don't care. Their silence feels like rejection. Their distance feels like indifference. And yet, that assumption couldn't be further from the truth in most cases. People with avoidant tendencies often feel deeply, sometimes more deeply than they let on, but their response to intimacy is shaped by fear, not by a lack of emotional connection. They may come across as aloof, disengaged, or emotionally unavailable, but beneath that exterior is often a person who has learned, consciously or not, that closeness is risky. Avoidant attachment patterns usually stem from early experiences in childhood where emotional needs weren't consistently met. This can lead to a deeply ingrained belief that depending on others is unsafe, or that vulnerability leads to disappointment, rejection, or even humiliation. So as adults, they adopt protective strategies that allow them to feel in control, keeping people at arm's length, suppressing emotional expression, or detaching when situations get too intimate. These aren't signs that they don't care. They're signs that closeness feels threatening. When a relationship begins to deepen, the avoidant partner may start to feel a sense of internal pressure, even if their partner isn't asking for anything dramatic. Something as simple as increased emotional vulnerability, regular check-ins, or talking about the future can trigger their fears. To them, this kind of intimacy doesn't represent connection. It represents a potential loss of freedom or the beginning of emotional dependency, which they may interpret as weakness or danger. As a result, they instinctively pull back, often without explanation. This distancing behavior can be profoundly confusing and painful for the other person in the relationship, particularly if they are securely or anxiously attached. It feels personal, it feels like rejection, but for the avoidant, it's rarely about the partner. It's about survival. They're trying to maintain a sense of safety by retreating into emotional solitude. Ironically, the more they care, the more intense this reaction can become. Deep feelings stir up the very fears they've been working to avoid. Understanding that avoidants do, in fact, feel deeply, despite their actions, can shift the way someone interprets their behavior. It doesn't make the withdrawal hurt less, but it can prevent the spiral of self-blame that often follows. The issue is not that the avoidant lacks emotion, it's that they've learned to fear what happens when emotion leads to closeness. They equate intimacy with a threat to their independence or a risk of emotional pain, so they opt for distance as a form of self-protection. This is why so many avoidant individuals may come back after a period of no contact. That space allows them to breathe, reset, and feel safe again. With the emotional intensity dialed down, they start to reflect, not because they never cared, but because they did. And the fear around that caring took time to regulate. It's not the absence of emotion that drives their behavior. It's the overwhelming nature of it. When an avoidant partner returns after a period of no contact, it's natural to feel a rush of hope. You may assume their return means they've had some sort of awakening, that they've realized your worth, or that they're ready to show up differently. But more often than not, their return is driven by discomfort rather than genuine transformation. There's a significant difference between missing someone and being ready to change for them. Many avoidant individuals come back not because they've worked through their fears or shifted their emotional patterns, but because the silence has become uncomfortable. Avoidants are often hypersensitive to emotional overwhelm. And during a relationship, they feel safest when they're in control of their own space and emotion. When things become too emotionally charged, their instinct is to withdraw. However, during no contact, the absence of connection can begin to wear on them in ways they didn't expect. The emotional space they initially sought out starts to feel more like loneliness. The silence that once felt like freedom begins to echo. Without the pressure of closeness, they may begin to reflect, not necessarily on how to grow, but on how much they miss the comfort, attention, or emotional safety they experience with you. Their return often reflects a desire to alleviate this discomfort. It can be an emotional reflex, a way to self-soothe, to feel desired again, or to re-establish a sense of control. In this sense, their reappearance is reactive, not reflective. They aren't necessarily saying, "I've grown and I want to show up better." They're often saying, "This quiet feels unfamiliar and I want to escape it." That distinction is everything. Without real inner work, the same avoidant behaviors will likely resurface, leading to the same cycle of connection and withdrawal. This is not to say that an avoidant person can't change or doesn't care. Many do care deeply, but the patterns they operate from are deeply ingrained. Real change requires self-awareness, a willingness to be uncomfortable, in vulnerability, and often therapeutic support. Simply missing someone or feeling lonely isn't enough to override those internal defenses. That's why it's so important to look beyond the fact that they came back and ask what's motivating their return. Are they expressing genuine remorse? Do they acknowledge the emotional gap they created? Are they offering new behavior, not just old words? It's tempting to view their return as validation, that you were right to believe in the connection, that your patience is finally paying off. But without signs of emotional maturity, consistency, and accountability, their return may just be part of the cycle. Avoidance can miss you, reach out, and still not be ready to meet the needs of a real relationship. The truth is, comfort is not the same as commitment. Just because someone feels the loss of your presence doesn't mean they're prepared to honor it when you're back in their life. What matters most isn't whether they come back, it's whether they come back changed. When someone reappears after a period of absence, especially someone with avoidant tendencies, it's easy to assume their return is a sign they're finally ready to build something real. You want to believe they've reflected, grown, and are coming back with clarity. But it's important to understand that re-entering someone's life isn't the same as being prepared to do the emotional work a relationship requires. A person can come back because they miss you, because they feel guilty, because they're lonely, or even because they hate the feeling of not having control. But none of these reasons automatically mean they're ready for the kind of consistency and vulnerability that lasting relationships are built on. Avoidant individuals often struggle with sustained emotional closeness. They may be drawn to the idea of connection, but once it begins to deepen, their protective instincts kick in. They crave intimacy and fear it at the same time. So when the intensity of the relationship overwhelms them, they retreat to regain their sense of emotional control. After time apart, especially during no contact, the emotional pressure dissipates. They begin to feel the absence of the relationship rather than the weight of it. This shift in feeling often prompts them to reach out. But this return is typically based on temporary emotional relief, not on a foundational shift in their capacity to stay connected through discomfort. Reconnection can be deceptive. It feels like progress. You tell yourself that if they didn't care, they wouldn't have come back. But caring and readiness are not the same thing. Someone can deeply care about you and still be unprepared to meet your needs, to communicate openly, or to stay emotionally engaged when things get real. They might be hoping that things will just go back to how they were without acknowledging the part they played in the disconnection. If there's no evidence of self-awareness, accountability, or new behavior, then their return is likely just a reset in the same cycle. Real readiness shows up in action. It looks like consistency, not intensity. It means someone is willing to stay through discomfort, to be vulnerable, to communicate even when it's not convenient or easy. It means they aren't just there when they miss you, they're there when you need support, when conflict arises, when emotions get messy. If those things aren't part of their return, then they may be stepping back into the relationship out of comfort, nostalgia, or habit, not out of a transformed mindset. You owe it to yourself to distinguish between someone who wants you and someone who's ready to build something with you. The former can reappear over and over again without ever really offering you more. The latter will show up differently, consistently, openly, and with a willingness to grow. Reappearance may feel like a turning point, but it only truly means something if it comes with meaningful change. Otherwise, it's just the start of another round in an exhausting emotional loop. It's easy to feel validated when someone who once pulled away suddenly reaches out again. The silence is broken, and in that moment, it feels like proof. You mattered. They missed you. But being missed is not the same as being valued. And someone missing you in your absence does not necessarily mean they knew how to treat you with care when you were present. Real value isn't found in absence, it's revealed in how consistently someone shows up, engages, and commits when they have access to you. Avoidant individuals often struggle to express appreciation and connection in real time. When you're emotionally available and present, they may pull away, retreating into their internal world. They create distance because it feels safer, more manageable. But when you go no contact and remove yourself from the equation, something shifts, the pressure disappears. They're left alone with their thoughts, their feelings, and, most importantly, the gap your absence creates. In that space, they may begin to reflect on what they had. And because you're no longer there, you're suddenly easier to idealize. The absence of your presence gives them a chance to miss the emotional safety, attention, or warmth you once offered. But again, this isn't necessarily about valuing you as a whole person. It may be more about the loss of comfort, the unfamiliarity of solitude, or the void left behind. They might come back craving the feelings you brought into their life without a real understanding or willingness to contribute to a mutual connection. Being missed doesn't require effort. It's passive. It happens to them. But valuing someone when they're present, that's active. It requires attention, presence, vulnerability, and action. You can't measure your worth by whether someone circles back after pulling away. That loop of detachment and return can trick you into thinking that the cycle itself means you're important. But importance isn't proven by how hard someone tries to get you back. It's proven by how consistently they work to keep and honor the relationship when they have it. A person who truly values you will make an effort to meet your emotional needs while you're there, not only when you've withdrawn. This is why it's so important not to confuse longing with loyalty or reappearance with readiness. The ego can be incredibly soothed by the idea that someone can't get over you. But your heart doesn't need someone who shows up only after you've gone quiet. It needs someone who's present, intentional, and emotionally available while you're there. That kind of value is steady, not conditional. It's not sparked by fear of loss, but by a genuine desire to grow something meaningful together. Someone who values you in your presence shows it in the way they communicate, the consistency of their actions, and their willingness to work through the tough moments. It's not grand gestures after silence that matter. It's the small, consistent efforts when things are ordinary. That's the kind of value you should hold out for, because that's the foundation real relationships are built on. In the end, understanding why avoidants come back after no contact is about recognizing the complex dance between fear and care, distance and desire. It's about seeing beyond the surface of withdrawal and realizing that their return often reflects a reaction to loss, not necessarily readiness for change. And while their reappearance can stir hope, it's crucial to stay grounded in your own worth and boundaries, knowing that you deserve consistency, presence, and genuine growth, not just fleeting moments of attention. Remember, your value is not determined by whether someone misses you or returns after silence. True value is found in how someone chooses to show up for you when you are present. Hold on to that truth, protect your heart, and never settle for less than the respect and commitment you deserve. Thank you so much for listening and allowing me to share these insights with you today. I hope this gives you clarity, strength, and the confidence to navigate your relationships with greater understanding and self-respect. Remember, you have the power to choose what you accept and what you don't. Take care of yourself, keep shining your light, and until next time, thank you again for being here.